Dr. Oschlanger, and I'd like to give a special thanks to our champions today. Each icon has a champion, and this is a real labor of love. Maybe Brand can fill us in on that, but there were lots of volunteers to participate. It's about 60 hours of work to put together these videos, so we are very grateful for the commitment of the champions. Dr. Oschlanger.
Well, thank you very much, and I really do appreciate the college and the Committee on Video-Based Education for giving me this honor to serve as the champion for this video honoring my dear friend and mentor, Dr. Pellegrini. Certainly a tireless leader for the American College of Surgeons and the president in its 100th year. He is certainly a most deserving recipient of this honor. You know, I was told that my job would be difficult and time-consuming, but the process was emblematic of Dr. Pellegrini. First, Kevin McGovern for CineMed enthusiastically took on this project as he fondly recalled his own father's experience working with Dr. Pellegrini some 30 years prior on a video for the ACS, and he jumped at the chance to work again with Dr. Pellegrini as his father had. It was just another example of Dr. Pellegrini knowing and impacting everyone in his path. Second, recognizing that a significant amount of work might fall on the champion, being me, Dr. Pellegrini immediately and consistently stepped up organizing content, providing photos, and even helping to edit the video. As I'm sure most of you know, he is always willing to put in the work for something to be successful. And third, in the end, as he always does, he deflects the credit for the product, as he has for his entire year, broadly to those around him. Dr. Pellegrini, you are truly one of a kind and deserving of this honor, and I hope you all enjoy this tribute. Thank you. You can roll the video. For his recent retirement celebration at the University of Washington, I summed up 4 characteristics critical to Dr. Pellegrini's success. He sees the good in everyone. It's always about someone else. He does the work, and he's a deceptive teacher. Like so many of you, I am fortunate to know Dr. Pellegrini as a colleague, mentor, and friend. I hope this interview brings you closer to the man.
I grew up in Argentina in a small rural community, primarily an Italian community that had come at the end of the century. And my parents were both physicians, and they were the only physicians in the town where we lived. So I experienced from early on 2 things. One is what it was like to attend to the needs of a community as a physician. And the other one, how does a community react to the needs of each other? I became interested in surgery in medical school very early during my medical school. And there were 2 individuals that were key to my entry into the profession. The first was Dr. Villaggi. Dr. Villaggi was the teacher of anatomy. As I finished medical school, I entered a residency program, and that residency was directed by Dr. Acosta. And so those would be the 2 figures that got me into surgery, one, and into academics, the other one. Chicago became the place where I first started working here because back a few years earlier, I had met Dr. Skinner, who had come as a visiting professor to the university where I was working. And Dr. Skinner and I had forged a little friendship based solely at the beginning on the fact that I was his assigned translator from English to Spanish. And that's how I came to work at the University of Chicago with him. I repeated my surgical residency, And he was very blunt, as he always was, very direct. And he said, well, if you want to work here, you have to obtain your credentials here. That was a good move. For example, Dr. Skinner helped me a lot. He was an esophageal surgeon. He was the chair of the Department of Surgery at the University of Chicago. But his younger partner at the time, Dr. DeMeester, is the one that actually really concentrated on me as a fellow and as a growing up person and got me into the details of esophageal physiology and esophageal function. After I finished my residency in Chicago, I was looking for a job, obviously, my first academic job. However, as I returned to Chicago, it became obvious to me that Dr. Skinner had talked to Dr. Ebert, who was the chair at UCSF, and that the arrangement had been done that I was going to be working at UCSF. I became very close to Dr. Lawrence Way. And Larry was another one of those individuals that really shaped my life. And how he shaped my life is primarily in two areas, I would say. One was in the operating room. Larry was, without a question, a master surgeon. The other side of Larry was that he's a phenomenal writer and a phenomenal communicator of ideas. And I would say he taught me how to write a paper. And at that time, Dr. DeBass had a long conversation with me about my future. I took the challenge and the opportunity he gave me to do three different things. One is to establish a much more relevant clinical presence at Moffitt in the University of California, San Francisco, developed a large clinical practice. The second one was to establish a laboratory of esophageal function and concentrate my publications and my contributions to the study of esophageal physiology. And the third one, to really become involved with education in a philosophical way, but also in a managerial way, to learn how to run a group of residents, to learn how to run a service with other surgeons from an academic perspective, to organize learning sessions for the residents. My decision to volunteer for the Army was tracks back to Dr. Skinner and my relationship with the University of Chicago at the time. One Desert Shield came about. I was called upon to go on active duty. I had been on active duty reserve, but this was real active duty. And it gave me an opportunity to be for nearly a year on active duty in the Army, primarily working at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington. This was a great experience in my life. It gave me an opportunity to meet fantastic people that are truly, especially devoted to the concept of advancing freedom, defending freedom, protecting the United States of America. Coming to the University of Washington gave me an opportunity to have a fresh start in many ways. We all have a sort of a true self, which is what you really are, and the fake self, which is what you wish you were or what others think you are. And Dr. DeBass had really asked me to be the true self when he gave me the opportunity to say, what do you really want to do in your life? I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be a clinician primarily, and I wanted to teach. And I wanted to teach through my clinical work. That was my true self. Building the culture of the department into something that really meant something to me was very important. from the very beginning. And that meant from the start to have a place or an environment where everybody felt welcome to come to work, where people felt joy in coming, where people developed gratitude and perspective for what they were given there. And to me, that starts at the top. So I put myself in a position that I had an obligation much greater than anybody else that I recruited to shape the environment in such a way that every person coming in to work at the Department of Surgery would feel welcome. Towards the end of the 1980s, laparoscopy became a new frontier in surgery, and most people gravitated towards doing the laparoscopic cholecystectomy. I thought that there was an opportunity to work on esophagus. With Dr. Kushkiri in Dundee, I learned how he was approaching achalasia, and that led me to develop or to do the first operation minimally invasively in a patient with achalasia in the US, doing a technique that I had learned from Dr. Kushkiri, which was the thoracoscopic approach. Operations on the esophagus, which were a relatively rare phenomenon before laparoscopy came about, because of the nature and the invasiveness that was required to do that, despite the effectiveness with which these operations cure the disease, both reflux or motility disorders, were not very common. We developed modifications to the technique of operating on achalasia that yielded much better results than the original operations, both the thoracoscopic or the laparoscopic approach, to become one of the centers that did most of the operations in achalasia patients in the country. I think that my main role in the education and training of residents has been totally aligned with the culture that I wanted to instill into the department. There was a culture of respect, a culture in which the environment provided a welcoming place for everybody. And with the residency, it was the same thing. I made a concerted effort to get women into surgery first. It was easy because the names were usually a clear identifier who was a woman and who was not. But then individuals from minority backgrounds of all kinds, many Latinos gravitated to the department because of my own presence. And so diversity was an issue that came into place. And diversity, when it's mixed with the culture that we talked about earlier, that is a welcoming environment for everybody, an environment of respect for people's ideas, feelings, and values, even though they may differ slightly from one from the other, was probably the what I consider the most important contribution to the residency program at the University of Washington. The culture that compassion and empathy for what happens around you is a very important thing. The culture that everybody is responsible for what happens to them, and everybody is responsible for shaping their own future, but within the guardrails of a community. That means not interfering with somebody else's development. And I think that perhaps that focus in what I call the total person development, not just the surgical technique development, is what distinguishes our residency and our educational program from the rest. The American College of Surgeons has played a very significant role in my life, primarily because it gave me a platform from where I could advance the ideas and the thoughts that I was expressing before, even the culture thoughts, the educational thoughts, primarily the educational side. The regent was to help Dr. Sachdeva, the person in charge of the Division of Education, to create what is now called the American College of Surgeons Educational Institutes program, a program that oversees the operations and the accreditation of the nearly 100 centers that in the United States that do education of residents and training of residents. That presidency is something that obviously is the ultimate thing that I could have aspired to. It was a great privilege, a great honor. It was particularly timely because it happened when the college turned 100 years, and particularly important to me and the people I came from, because I am the first person to reach the presidency, having been born in Latin America. I would say the presidency of the American College of Surgeons, without a doubt, was the highlight of my professional career. I think that throughout my life, I have been blessed by having a great relationship family-wise and a great support by Kelly, my wife. My two sons indirectly involved in my life and supporting me, but they are grown up and they have their own life. But primarily blessed by having developed a large network of friends. People always kid me that they say that I have so many friends, but it is true. To me, it is the greatest asset that any human being has in life. I stepped down as a chair at the end of 2015, essentially having completed 23 years in the role of chair. My motto was, I want people to ask me, why did you stop operating, rather than when. I had an opportunity to reshape some things on the health system that were very important to me, bring a program of healthcare equity, which was very important to me, create a platform from where other people could do a lot of other things that they needed to do. And so those 3 years were well used. As I think back in my entire professional life, the real pleasure came from interacting with patients, with residents, with students, and with faculty in my position as chair. That relationships between human beings was, to me, one of the most interesting aspects of life. And that if I developed some expertise on managing those relationships, I could contribute still substantially to society, but more importantly, I would have fun during my retirement doing more work. And so with that in mind, I went back to school to study and eventually become a coach. I'm copying the models that I developed with my own experience throughout the years of chair of the Department of Surgery and through the 3 years of chief medical officer, and apply that experience along with the tools that I have acquired in my coaching training to do the coaching. My life since I retired has been enriched even more than when I was working.
So we have a little change in plan. Actually, the two microphones are open for discussion, and you will be filmed from the front, so no longer do you need to come to the podium. So we'd like to open this up, perhaps some comments from Dr. Oschlanger and then from the audience.
Well, that was a great video. I don't think I can add anything to that. So I would say we should open up there are many friends and colleagues of Carlos's in the audience who I'm sure would like to say a few words about what he meant to them, to the college, or the whole world in professional surgery. So please come to the microphone and share your thoughts. Please just introduce yourself and where you're from and your connection, maybe.
I'm Edward Aoyang. I'm at the University of New Mexico, and Dr. Pellegrini was one of my attendings during fellowship when I was at the University of Washington. And I think the story that I want to share is kind of about the type of person that he is. So when I was a fellow and looking for jobs, I remember being in his office and saying, hey, I'm looking at this job at the University of New Mexico. And little did I know, one of his best friends that goes all the way back to medical school, Dr. Jorge Wernley, was faculty there. And literally he picked up his cell phone and said, hold on one second, and spoken to him and said, you know, when you go do your interview down there, make sure you get a chance to talk to Dr. Wernley. He'll steer you straight. So when I did my interview down there, Dr. Wernley's words to me were, if you are one of Dr. Pellegrini's fellows, it's like you are a son for him. And I'm sorry. And that's how I'll take care of you if you're here also. So to me, that was just one of the most important things that I learned from Dr. Pellegrini was his friendships and how he treated people. And I will never forget that to this day. Thank you, sir.
My name is Marco Patti. I'm Italian, and I met Dr. Pellegrini on June 23, 1983. The story is strange. I was planning to do 1 year of research with Lawrence Way, so I went to his office, and he asked me a few questions, and he had an empty look after I spoke. So he took me by the shoulder, he took me to Carlos' office and said, I don't understand a word of this guy says. You speak Italian, so it's better if you work. So I was a gift because they was Carlos' birthday. Now, on a more serious note, I think Brandt and the beautiful movie has traced many qualities of Dr. Pellegrini, but in reality, there is one that has not been traced, and that's summarized in the book of Malcolm Gladwell about outliers. Without any question, Dr. Pellegrini is an outlier, and I think the chapter that mostly describes him is the 10,000 hours rule. So what Gladwell says in his book, if you want to achieve certain results and get to a certain quality, you have to apply yourself and you work hard. I remember when I was a fellow with him, he paged me at 5 o'clock to make sure I was in the hospital, and then he paged me at midnight to make sure I was still there waiting for him to leave. So I learned a lot and has been a role model and a guide throughout my entire career. So thank you very much.
Bill Richards from Mobile, Alabama. I first met Carlos in the early 90s. Carlos was showing a video at the American College of Surgeons about his technique for doing thoracoscopic hilar myotomy. I was a young junior attending assistant professor. I went up to the man after the video and said, tell me the tricks. How do you line this up? How do you do all this? He took time, effort, made sure I understand exactly how to set it up. I went back to Vanderbilt. I asked John Sawyers to back me up. He was our chief of surgery. He said, sure. He stood behind me, you know, while we're doing this operation with Ken Sharp, okay? And just said, he kept on saying, you ready for me to open up the chest yet? But I thank you, Dr. Pellegrini, for giving your time and effort to a young junior attending to explain carefully exactly how to perfect an operation. Thank you.
I am Alberto Ferrez from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I first met Dr. Pellegrini around 1984. We have lunch together arranged through my boss at that moment, Dr. Vicente Gutierrez. And since that moment, he transformed himself in a beacon in my academic life, especially here in the US. Thank you very much. In the name of my whole family, thank you.
I'm Doug Wood at the University of Washington, and I had the unenviable task of trying to follow in Dr. Pellegrini's footsteps, which I think the people here in this audience know that's an impossible thing to do. And yet, when I think about my whole career and how I came to the University of Washington, Dr. Pellegrini has been a mentor and a role model for me as an assistant professor, then as an associate professor, and then in various aspects as I progressed through academic surgery, and has been a supporter and confidant and somebody that I aspire to be like. And that's one of those things that, there's a handful of people in your lives that you look to and you say, I want to be like them. And that's how I feel about you, Carlos. I want to be like you. And for me, the most meaningful is your understanding of people. It shows every day in your friendships that I joked with you about. There's no one in this room that you don't know closely. But the reality is, that is really you in terms of how you understand people and how I come to you, and I still come to you, when I need advice about understanding a difficult problem. I thank you for your support in the past and for your ongoing support in the future. Thank you.
I'm buried in Abnett, Lexington, Kentucky. Carlos, you may remember that many years ago we were on faculty at the Georgia Surgical Society, and Dr. Lamar McGinnis invited me and my wife, you and Kelly, and of course him and his lovely wife, out to a wonderful lunch. And during that lunch, over a glass of wine, you and Kelly recounted your very personal story of leaving Argentina and under the circumstances. And I began to realize that that story is in large part formed the person that you are and how you treat people. And I said to myself, I want to be just like Dr. Pellegrini. He is a wonderful person and treats people with the utmost respect. And I think that is something that everyone in the audience here is here to support you because of your immense, totally genuine friendship to all people of all types. And thank you so much for giving me that something to strive towards. Thank you.
I am Elena Quiroga. I am from Argentina, now at the University of Washington as a vascular surgery. Thank you for Dr. Pellegrini. I first going to start with a little joke, and because I know that I'm going to start crying. I cannot do this, and I never cry. The only person I think that in the world that made me cry is Dr. Pellegrini. So when I was in 2002, I was a visiting scholar. I barely speak English, really, not like now. And I was doing clinic with him. And there was this patient that came to see him with esophageal stricture. And when she was like 5 years old, she was in Thailand. She was living in Thailand, and she had a chemical burn. And now she's like 30-something, she's having dysphagia, came to see him. I'm presenting the patient. I prepare so well to prepare the patient. And when I am presenting the patient, he asked me where she was treated. And I says, in Thailand. I says, where she was treated. He says, in Thailand, the country. And he goes, yes, in which hospital? I look in the records, told him Bangkok, the name of the hospital, and he said, it was so-and-so. Yes, oh, he's a friend of mine. And of course, he proceeded to call the surgeon that treated this patient 15 years ago that still remember the case because he knows absolutely everybody. Dr. Schlager said before, you see the best in everybody. I don't know how you do it. And my kids see the same on you. They think that you're one of the best persons, and I don't know what I have done to be lucky enough to meet you. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more comment because we're going to let Dr. Pellegrini give the final word of this first half of the ICON session.
Andrew Wright, University of Washington. I was struck in the video by your comment about the culture of compassion. So one personal story I'll get choked up to. I had cancer. I was on the faculty. Dr. Pellegrini said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of everything." And he did. And he does that for everyone he knows. Thank you.
Last comment. I'm Sachi Brian, and I came to this country in 2000. And I was on J1 visa. I did my prelim first year, second year. Then I finished my residency. Then I was looking for a fellowship. I got about 20 interviews. The 13th one, I went to University of Washington. Then I met Dr. Pellegrini, and he said, "I'm going to ask you one question." And I said, "What is that question?" He said, "What was the question in your mind when you came to this country that you were looking for an answer?" I said, "The question at that time was, why they have to give me a spot in a residency program and pick me as a foreign grad who do not speak their language very well and leave a US student out?" And he said, "What was the answer for that question?" I said, "As a foreign grad, you have to work very hard to be humble and do a good job." Dr. Pellegrini, he was not only a mentor, but he was the person that I found him to be a father. And every day in my practice, I remember my interaction with him, and I try to be a good person like him. Thank you, Dr. Pellegrini.
Thank you. I will make it brief. We don't want to steal any time. So I want to just say thank you. Thank you to Barry and his committee for this election. There are a lot of people that could be here instead of me, and the one that follows is a real giant of surgery. Second, thank you to all those who commented on different aspects. It's been my privilege to help those who I helped and to be helped by many who are not here today. And I have considered the time that I spent in the college and the time that I spent individually with each one of you as probably the richest part of my life. So with that word of thanks to Kevin for helping us in the editing, and certainly thank you for Brand for all the time that he put and for all the times that he took care of my patients when I had to travel. Thank you all.
Wow, we're not done. Two quick housekeeping things. We are grateful to the college for their support to be able to put the story of the icons on. So it's really important that if you find this important to your life, to fill out the forms and say this is important. That's how we keep the programs running.
And second to that, there is a donation option. If you go to the foundation and write in icons, funds will be directed to the icons program so we can put this on in perpetuity. So please support this program.
Barry, Bill, and I, and the support of the Video-Based Education Committee, have felt that it's very important to keep the legacy of the surgeons who have made surgery what it is today important in the hearts and minds of everybody. This is why we do it. It is a labor of love. When it comes to surgical innovation, there are giants, and then there are giants. And I've had the privilege of knowing the introducer, Tom Crummell, for a number of years, who has been intimately associated with Stanford Biodesign and his work with Tom Fogarty. As a young device developer, he was my hero. And so it's a pretty amazing story. So it's an incredible honor to ask Tom Crummell to come to the stage and introduce one of the true icons in surgery, Thomas J. Fogarty.
Well, Steve, thank you. It's my gratitude to the college and the organizers. Indeed, you've heard the phrase labor of love, but absolutely rings true. Really a privilege to have spent a little time over the last 20 years getting to know Dr. Fogarty, not only as a wonderful colleague and a mentor, but also as a dear friend. You tend to think of Dr. Fogarty as a device guy, but in point of fact, Dr. Fogarty is an inventor and a problem solver, and the devices are the route to solve the problem. And so at the heart of everything that Tom has developed over more than 50 years is a real empathy for the patient with the problem. And I hope that that will come through in a real story of creative ingenuity that spans more than 50 years. So if we could roll the video, please. Any idea how many patients have been treated with the balloon catheter? Hard to keep score, right?
Yeah, I have no idea.
But it's got to be tens of millions.
Yes, yeah.
How does that make you feel when you think about that impact that you've had?
It makes me feel good.
Almost every surgeon in the world has at one time or another shouted, "Get me a Fogarty." That's not taking Tom Fogarty's name in vain. They're asking for this simple balloon on a catheter, which has been one of the most transformational medical devices in the last 50 years, is but one of the many developments and accomplishments that we'll celebrate Dr. Fogarty's career with in this video. So Tom, we'll start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about the Cincinnati years and school and being a troublemaker and staying out of jail and anything else that comes to mind.
Well, how do you know I did stay out of jail?
Well, now's the time to set the record straight.
Being brought up in Cincinnati for me was a great experience. I spent most of my time on the wrong side of the track because I enjoyed it more. In the neighborhood, when anything was missing or things were broken, they knew where to go. It was to my address. Getting in trouble was a very good learning experience.
What did your parents think about the troublemaker component?
Well, my dad was gone by the time I was 7. He essentially was a victim of post-traumatic syndrome. He was in the First World War. He was a platoon sergeant, and about 2/3 of his platoon was wiped out. He was a survivor. He left to go to the war, a very vital human being, and came back essentially not so vital, became an alcoholic, and so he wasn't around much. So my mother was my first mentor, and she taught me a lot.
What was your mother like?
She was a very tough German lady. She had to be. I mean, having 3 kids, very little finances. In those days, women, when they worked, they were paid very little. And she was actually worked in a sweatshop, a dry cleaning store, and she did everything from the accounting to the billing to running the steamer to doing the sewing. And
whatever was needed, she did it.
Now she had you fix some things around the house too. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, and I kind of like to do it. You know, I just like to fix things.
I once heard you describe yourself as a pugilist, a fighter. When did you start your boxing career?
Really, when I started boxing seriously, it was a summer camp to keep me out of trouble. They really taught us how to box the proper way, so I became pretty good at it. We'd box, and you got a part of the purse if you won. So I liked to win, and I was having fun winning, so I decided I was going to be a boxer, and that was my path all the way through high school.
The balloon catheter is not your first invention. Can you tell us about the centrifugal clutch, please?
In the neighborhood, there was only one family that was relatively wealthy, and he was a dentist. And I became very friendly with his son, who was kind of what we called back then as a pinhead. A pinhead was a nerd. And this guy was tall, very gangly, and very withdrawn. But he had a Cushman motor scooter. And so, you know, I liked mechanical things, and it was fun riding on a scooter. The problem was, back then, they were all mechanical clutches. And so when you would be going up a hill, and you were in high, you had to shift into low. And I was on the back of that scooter all the time. And the back sloped down, but on the middle of the slope, there was a big backup light that was about the size of your fist. And so when you shift from high into low, it would jerk ahead, really jerk. So I'd find myself on the street sliding off that slope. And on the way down,
You hit the tail light.
I hit the tail light, and that caused considerable pain and discomfort. And I said to Pinhead, we got to stop this. We got to figure out how to make this transition much smoother. I worked in a machine shop and a gas station. I cleaned up the machine shop after work, and Pinhead would come down. And we learned how to use some of the tools with their permission. And that led to the development of the centrifugal clutch. Any small motor has usually some form of centrifugal clutch on it now. But at that time, I didn't know anything about intellectual property. But what I did learn, if you work at a facility, you use their instrumentation and time to create something, they own the creation. It's called shop rights. It's very similar to what goes on major universities. Right out of the 8th grade, I got a job at Good Samaritan Hospital, an orderly, and I did all different kinds of things, and they were interesting things for me. At that time, they reused all needles. They were stainless steel. So you had to clean them, and you had to resharpen them. So I learned how to do that, which I enjoyed, and it was a way to make money. It really got me interested in medicine.
Is that where you met Jack Cranley?
That's where I met Jack Cranley. He saw me rolling the oxygen tanks into the rooms. The oxygen tanks were bigger than me. So he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm working." Because that's what I was doing. Uh-huh. One of the priests convinced me, and Dr. Cranley, who's my mentor, convinced me that I should use my brains for something other than getting them knocked out. And so I thought, well, that's a good idea. Jack Cranley was one of the first surgeons to really dedicate his practice to vascular procedures. So it was very exciting to see new things. And I saw a lot of things that didn't work. And one of them was when you hit a blood clot, how do you get it out? There are usually 3 or 4 procedures. They would go back for a third operation, which was usually an amputation. And I would see all this as a scrub technician. And Dr. Cranley says, you know, this isn't working, isn't it? And I said, no, it's not working. He said, well, why don't you do something about it? I said, you want me to do something about it? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, you got to help me. He said, okay. So that was the origin of the balloon catheter.
You were fiddling around in the attic with ties and taking the end of a glove off?
Yes. Yeah, it was very simple. I stole a ureteral catheter.
Yeah.
And I took a number 5 glove and I cut the fingertip of the baby finger and tied it onto a ureteral catheter.
When was the first time you used it clinically?
1959 or 60.
Was this when you were with
Cranley?
Cranley. Did he like it?
Oh, yeah. You know, there's certain phrases that happen when you really observe something interesting, and his comment was, oh, shit.
Meaning it really worked.
It worked.
And you made those catheters for quite a while.
I made those catheters for quite a while because I could not find a manufacturer to help me. I did it myself for about 2 years when I was in my room. You know, it's a kid, essentially, acting like a surgeon. And they said, this is crazy. That kid doesn't know what he's doing.
Here's a quote from Dr. William Altmeyer, a very prominent surgeon at that time, who said, a dangerous and inappropriate procedure. Only one so inexperienced and uninformed as a student would dare think of this.
The entrenched standards resist disruptors.
Absolutely. The balloon catheter could not get published. I think we went through every major journal.
You're ruining a perfectly good operation. A classic disruption that nobody wanted until everybody uses.
We are taught in the field of medicine, protect the patient at all costs, and the way to do that is do what you've always done. And if you don't do that, you're deviating from the standard of care. If you deviate from the standard of care, your chances of getting sued are pretty high. So there's real incentive not to explore things beyond what you've been taught. The greatest deterrent to innovation in the field of medicine is displacing the old.
Mm-hmm.
The old technology, the elderly people, the habits that have been established, and peer pressure from above.
What did you think about the environment in Silicon Valley?
I loved the environment. It was all exciting. Everybody was doing something new. Medical technology was really not very prominent in Silicon Valley when I came here. The value of medical technology here came from others that migrated into Silicon Valley. And a lot of it came from South Orange County.
Yep. Edwards Labs.
Yeah, Edwards Lab was a big one. So a lot of the things that I did with Edwards, but up here.
What was the insight that led to the development of the tissue valve? The
insight really came out of Edwards. The ball valve was fraught with a lot of problems. One was durability. The other was clot formation. So people were required to be on Coumadin, which was bad. The concept of a tissue valve came up, and Edwards didn't want anything to do with it.
Why was that?
The ball valve was the valve. There's no other valve available. So that was a source of revenue to the company. If a company has major market share, to expect them to adapt something that'll put them out of business is wishful thinking. You're going to have a company that has vision. You know, innovation, really, the first step is imagination, and the last step is commercialization. It does no good for anybody unless you can commercialize technology. And that is a very difficult step unless you've been through it. When I see a problem in the field of surgery, I make the engineers go in and see an operation, a standard operation, and what we're trying to improve about that operation. And it's amazing what they'll come up with. They'll come up with something that you totally miss. Because as a trainee in the field of surgery, you're trained to do things a certain way. And doing the same thing the same way all the time conditions you to not think beyond that. But if you have a fresh thought come in there, and that thought comes from an engineer, really consider that thought and respond to it.
What are surgeons' biggest failings when they try to work on those teams?
Their ego. They think they know everything. Well, they don't know enough of anything. So you need other people, and you have to respect them and really listen to them.
So 10 years ago, you started the Fogarty Institute.
That's 12.
12. Time flies.
It does. Being exposed to the VA, the NIH, not-for-profits, profit, and what I was exposed to at a young age, I wanted to replicate. That's incorporated in what we're trying to accomplish at the Institute. Innovate with the purpose of benefiting patients.
The Fogarty Institute may be your biggest contribution because of the multiplicative effect of all of the young people and the technologies that will continue for the rest of their lifetime. You know, it's that pebbles in the pond, the ripples just go and go and go.
Yes, yeah. That's why mentorship is so important. And that's what makes this field so rewarding. It really does. I mean, you multiply the efforts. I think we're going to have some technology that's going to be transcutaneous. It's probably going to be some forms of energy. The gamma knife and the cyber knife are two great examples of ablating something and not having any punctures or incision. My experience is probably much like others who innovate, observe a failure. So just observing what doesn't work and then conceiving of something that may work and being encouraged to implement something that would work and aiding somebody in that implementation is critical, it has been critical to my success. And part of that is just being curious and asking questions like why.
Thomas J. Fogarty. National Medal of Technology and Innovation to Thomas J. Fogarty, Fogarty Institute for Innovation, for innovations in minimally invasive medical devices.
I hope what came through in the video is a fundamentally iconoclastic way of thinking, of belief in yourself and empathy for the problem to be solved. And Dr. Fogarty has done it over and over and over and over again. And I think he also offered a few blueprints for the young in the audience and for the young at heart in the audience. With that, we'll open it up to comments, and I'll get some sunglasses so I can see who wants to make a
guess I'll start. Richard Lynn from Palm Beach, Florida. One of the high points for my professional career has been to get to be a friend of Tom Fogarty's, not from having trained me, although obviously I've used all of the things he's invented, but on a personal level. And I think one of the incredible qualities, Tom, that you have amongst so many are that you're just a regular guy, if you will, and without any pretentiousness and with any, just being what you see is what you get, and that when somebody asks you a question, you can pretty much bet on the fact that it'll be, it may not even be what you want to hear, but it's going to be the truth. And as you know, for me personally, when I was president of the Florida chapter of the college, and I reached out for you to come down to Palm Beach at the Breakers, and you accepted, and spent 3 days there, and just lit up the audience with your straightforwardness and what you are, and then again, I'll put a pitch in for the college for next year. The history group is the panel session. It's going to be on subspecialties in surgery, and I have the privilege of chairing it like you all are doing this year. And Tom, again, I reached out because one subspecialty is endovascular surgery, and Tom's going to come to Chicago and do that. So you all want to come again. But Tom, thank you for everything you've done for me personally in my own professional life. And even when I've had some problems, I would pick your brain, and you'd make me feel better, and you'd get me back on the straight and narrow. So thank you.
Yeah, we got one comment there.
Dan Jones.
Yes,
Hi. 25 years ago, one of your companies, GSI, made balloons for me. So when I was in the lab, I got to put balloons in the groin and the neck and the belly, and it was the beginning of my academic career. At the time, we had a series looking at laparoscopic aortic bypass using the Fogarty balloons, making retroperitoneal spaces, and I had no money to go to Europe, and you actually wrote me a personal check that allowed me and my wife to go, and it was the beginning of my academic career. I did pretty good after that, so thank you very much.
Got one more comment there, yes? No.
Hi, Danny Lund. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at the Children's Hospital at Stanford. And, as surgeons, we have an opportunity in our lives to maybe influence 20,000, 25,000 people's lives by what we directly do.
Yep.
But it's really the rare person that can influence millions of lives by creating an innovation or an invention that gets such wide use. I remember when I was the chief resident at the Mass General a long time ago, struggling with all of these vasculopaths and using not only Fogarty embolectomy catheters, but Fogarty clamps. And I wanted to know, who is this guy Fogarty who had influenced so many people's lives by these inventions. So I am delighted to be here and to have gotten to know Dr. Fogarty a little bit through my time in Silicon Valley, and I congratulate you.
Okay, Tom, you want to make the last comment, please?
No. It truly is a pleasure to be here. Of course, when you reach a certain age, it's a pleasure to be anywhere. But now, it's been a wonderful career, and a lot of us have been do what we are and what we become are a product of your mentors, both your bad and your good. You look at the bad, look at the good, you compare those two, you decide you want to be good, hopefully. So I think as I reflect on my path, what I've become really is a result of my mentors. And I have a great debt of gratitude of all of them. I don't have time to name all of them, but the first one, as mentioned in the movie, was my mother. I paid attention to her sometimes, not always, but most of the time. I was a rebel, but people tolerated me because I think they knew I had some value, and somehow they sensed that, and so I really do believe that we are a product of our mentors, all our mentors. Dr. Jack Cranley, who helped me with a balloon catheter, was my mentor until my death. And so I have a great debt of gratitude to that individual who was a very enthusiastic member of the Fellow of the American College of Surgeons. So let's all go get the hell out of here. Thank you.